Hello. How's it going? Lady Board, you're first. Welcome, everyone. Enels, LeBron, 1322, and Cool Banana, 69. Yeah, Thanksgiving next week. Heck yeah. Mr. Woke, that's right. Mr. Goat, 6'7". All right. So I hope you're doing well this morning. Mrs. Beat, the most important person in the world to me, is here. MSB87 Music. That's an interesting name there, but how are you? I'm good. Yeah. Gave a speech last night at a Episcopalian high school. That was different. You can see a clip of it on Instagram. So, and then today, I finally, I'm releasing my video about William McKinley. It's been a long time coming. We filmed it back in August, and here it's almost Thanksgiving, finally coming out. So that's why it's very different vibes when you watch the, like, oh, Mr. Beat looks like he's dying of heat. How is that possible? But yeah, and then that's the last one of all those videos I recorded between middle of July and the end of August. On location videos I did like 8 of them, and I'm just sticking to the studio for the next couple months at least. Doing a lot less traveling, saving some money. It's okay to typo, emails. It's okay. Oh my gosh. Are you talking about Death by Lightning? Oh my gosh. A seditious stream, punishable by death. Yeah. I can't believe he posted that. I mean, despite, yeah, it's Trump. We shouldn't be surprised, right? But man, he's calling for members of Congress to die because they're defending the Constitution. It's ridiculous. Beats by Dre. These are my Beats by Dre. Huh? What's that? HO. Is that the video game? I'm not a gamer. Okay. Keep me in the loop here. I'm All right. So what do I got going on? Yeah, so this afternoon the William McKinley video finally comes out. I just if you haven't seen Death by Lightning, please watch it. I've now watched it twice. And I put clips of my stream last Friday of me reviewing it, and I turned it into a short. Shout out to Hudson, who helped me edit a little bit. And today we've got 2 videos lined up to react to. So one, I think, is supposed to be a comedy video that keeps getting recommended to me. The other one is a friend, well, more of an acquaintance, but Sia, I always mispronounce his name. Siawish has a channel called, I can mispronounce his channel too, Al Mukadama. He is someone I met through Matt from Useful Charts. He works with him. I think he still does. He used to, at least. And so he made a video about our boy, Dick Cheney. Yeah, Dick Cheney passed away a couple weeks ago. His funeral was yesterday, so I thought it'd be timely to kind of start to reflect on the legacy of Mr. Dick Cheney. I think one of the worst vice presidents in American history. Our boy. All right. So first of all, this more silly video. I think it's silly. The channel is called Al Jokes. At first, I read it as AI Jokes, but I'm pretty sure it says Al Jokes. The title of the video is Politicians from 1925 and 2025 Debate Each Other. I've been thinking a lot about the 1920s lately, mostly the 1890s and 1880s. But, you know, I'm spending most of my days chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool and all, shooting some b-ball out inside on the school. No, I'm kidding. I spend most of my days reading about events that happened more than 100 years ago, and it helps my sanity a lot. But the more I read all this stuff that happened during the 1880s through the 1920s, I'm just like, man, this is just it's way too relevant. It's so relevant. And that's why I'm excited to release a video here in a couple months about how essentially we're living through the progressive era. We're at the beginning stages of the next progressive era. You already know, we've already talked about this, how this is the second Gilded Age. Many historians now even say this, but I feel like the 2020s or the 1890s more than any other decade. I said this publicly a little bit already, but I want to do a deeper dive into it. And so I'm going to make a standalone video arguing that hypothesis. Enels, behave yourself today. Okay, let's go ahead and start this video. Shall we? Let me know if you can't hear it, as always.
Tonight's debate broadcast.
And again, I've never heard of this channel before. It just kept getting recommended to me.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's debate broadcast live from Memphis, Tennessee. My name is Jim. Good evening and welcome back to the rebroadcast of tonight's debate, this time filmed live in the much safer city of San Jose, California. Shocker, Tennessee was not safe. 8 out of 10 of the most dangerous states are red. And where does all the crime in all those red states come from? The blue cities. Aha! Aha! I will be moderating tonight's debate completely unbiased to ensure a fair exchange between the two candidates. Now, let's meet them. Hi, my name is Bill Johnson. I'm the Democratic politician out of Louisiana. Yes, we used to be blue. And I'm from the year 1925. And I'm John Bilson, an entrepreneur who got rich in business and now shares opinions online, which I guess makes me a politician in 2025. And I'm a Republican. Thank you.
I like that. Yeah, no, the blue thing, by the way, didn't start until the 1980s. It used to be that actually the Democratic Party used the color red. I know this is confusing. And the Republican Party used the color blue. So this whole blue states and red states thing is a modern phenomenon, started in the 1980s. So in 1925, the Democrat would not say blue state or blue city. Also, this whole idea of a blue city where the crime is, let's just put that to rest. That's one of the dumbest things you could ever hear if somebody says, oh, well, the crime's happening in blue cities. No, crime happens where there's poverty. And there just happens to be more poverty, more people. That's the distinction. There's more people in cities. That's why they're called cities, because there's more people clustered together. And so there's still crime happening with mostly poorer people in rural areas or suburban areas, although suburban areas tend to be less poor than urban and rural. But it's just the fact that there's more clustered people in close proximity is why crime happens more in cities. So when you say crime is happening more in blue cities, all you have to say is crime happens more if you have... No, you don't even need to say anything. It's so stupid. It's just so it's so stupid. No, crime happens everywhere. Let's just leave it at that. Okay? Wow. The more I think about it, the more my brain starts to hurt. Okay, back to this silly little video.
Gentlemen, now let's begin with opening statements. Mr. Johnson. My fellow Americans, our nation stands at a crossroad between fear and progress. I believe in a government that uplifts its people, one that protects workers, invests in education, and ensures that prosperity is shared by all, not hoarded by a few. And I believe together we can build a better, stronger America. Also, women shouldn't be allowed to vote.
5 years prior, 1925, women got the right to vote thanks to the 19th Amendment.
Mr. Bilson, this guy's a fucking piece of shit. He's ugly. He's a failure. He's failed at everything he's done. Nobody likes him. Nobody trusts him. His own party doesn't trust him. You. You're fat. You're a fat piece of shit. Would you like to respond? Well, I'm not going to deny that I made mistakes and failed in the past, and I've owned up to that. But I believe that what defines a great leader isn't never failing, it's his ability to get back up. And I've bounced back and came back stronger numerous times, just as my opponent has done in business, which I admire very much. How does my taste? That resilience is what I believe the American people respect. Not perfection, but the strength to keep moving forward. David Gazer, what? What? I knew it. He's also gay. We're live. You know that, right? Homosexual. Come on, Shirley. Just be clear. Now, just to be clear, in this video, I'm not making the argument that the unhinged people in debates are on the right exclusively. It could definitely be either side. It just happened to work out in this video that way, that the left was a professional one and the right was the guy who's super unprofessional. I'm not saying that. No, you know what? Just to make sure this is not interpreted as a political stance, I'm going to make both people on the same
Look what's on his computer there. Those images.
side. So you're both on the right. This is now a Republican primary debate. So both the unprofessional and the professional guy are going to be on the right, just to show that this is strictly past versus future and not right versus left. Do you mind crossing over to the other side of the aisle for this video? Is it easy to get someone to go from the left to the right in the 1920s?
Yeah.
There we go. Welcome. All right, let's get into it. Mr. Bilson, with record unemployment destroying our country, what is your solution to get Americans off the couch and streets and into jobs? You have 30 seconds. Well, first off, I wanted to thank the great city of San Jose for hosting this. Some of my best friends are in San Jose, and San Jose is the backbone of the economy. Now, on to your question.
This is a weird video. What is up with that countdown?
The solution time, damn, I guess some things never change. And Mr. Johnson, your opponent said in a previous interview that government spending is outpacing revenue and is pushing us towards a debt spiral. What are your thoughts on his wife and kids? Well, I think that although myself and Mr. Bilson differ on many opinions, I still respect him as a politician, as a man, and as a human, and I'd never bring his family or his wife or his kids into this. Yeah, check this, check this. What is this? That's me and your wife last night. Yeah. Mr. Bilson, you still have 21 of your 30 seconds remaining. No, that was a whole video. 9 seconds, that's not bad. Right, I'm getting better. Gentlemen, excuse my language, but what in the heck is going on here? I mean, I can tolerate the unprofessionalism and the insults, but the blatant disrespect, the line crossing my family. This used to be a professional event. Yeah, well, this is better for ratings. It's politics. It's not supposed to have good ratings. It's supposed to be boring. You're not supposed to want to gather around with your friends and watch two government people talk. That's exactly what we did with our friends. 2016 and 2020 debates were hilarious. 2016 and 2020 were peak entertainment. It's not supposed to be entertainment. It's supposed to be politics. The best government is the government you don't notice. We can agree there. No, you guys are both in the right now, remember? Oh, yeah, right. I mean, what happened here, gentlemen? Look at us. We used to be the people that the young generation look up to. Now they're just laughing at us. How did your generation turn this whole thing into a spectacle? Well, I don't necessarily think it was my generation, maybe the younger generation. It doesn't matter who. You're a professional. I would never lose my cool on a debate stage. I remember just the one before. The Obama ones were pretty professional, pretty tame. Obama, yeah. Barack Obama, the 44th president of the United States, our first black president.
The 1925 guy does not want to hear that.
You motherfuckers let a president be a goddamn...
Our brains are being melted by the algorithm.
That's another video that I've already watched, but it's really good. I recommend it. It's Jack Conte talking about how he's trying to design a social media platform that's not based on rage bait, basically. Okay, so just summarizing that last video.
Good evening and welcome to tonight.
It was a little confusing because, you know, it's harder to keep track of who was from 1925 and who was from 2025. I don't know. It's overly simplistic, obviously. I mean, you have wild characters in the 1920s. You had demagogues and you had those who were spicy with the language, even though the words were different. I think most of what we see now in terms of the raw, unfiltered language we hear is it's just Donald Trump and the Trump effect, basically. The comments are pretty useless. But yeah, I would say that video was okay. It was funny at parts, but overall, feels like that guy doesn't have very much knowledge of politics. And yeah, I'm glad he didn't mention how it wasn't that long ago before Trump really, you did have mostly boring politicians. You had to be a political science dork like us to want to follow this stuff closely, to watch C-SPAN religiously. Okay. Anyway, let's who is Suozi? Suozi. I don't know who that is. I need to educate myself on this. The next video is Siawish from the channel Al Makadama. He just made a video about Dick Cheney. So let's go ahead and check that out. And also, good morning. Who is that? H-Rod. Good to see you here. Okay. The video is not there. Oh, that's because I forgot to add it. Everybody go subscribe to Siawish's channel. It's good stuff. You'll see why here. But clearly he's biased against Dick Cheney. And he did want me to collaborate with him on this, but it kind of came at a bad time.
Today is Dick Cheney's funeral. The former Vice President of the United States died on November 3rd, 2025. As you'd expect, tributes started pouring in. Flags were flown at half-mast. It was a really sad day for the war criminal community. So I thought today would be the right time to talk about Dick Cheney's legacy. Does he actually deserve those tributes and half-mast flags? Or did he actually deserve a death squad? Oh.
Yeah, most of his channel focuses on Middle Eastern history, I believe. I've only seen some of his videos, but so this is a bit of a departure focusing on an American figure, but clearly an American figure who had a big impact on the Middle East, specifically Iraq, but also to a lesser extent Afghanistan, and somebody who profited a lot from the death and destruction that happened in particularly Iraq. Dick Cheney, most people who criticize him also call him a war criminal.
Before we begin, I'd like to tell everyone that my merchandise store is now up on almuqaddimah.com, where you can find really cool wall posters like the Timeline of Islamic History, which condenses 1400 plus years of
That's a collaboration with Useful Charts.
Islamic history into a beautiful timeline. Their artwork are in the description. Back to the video. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, there was a section of the US government that believed that the United States was now the sole superpower in the world and that it should throw its weight around more aggressively.
Yep.
Among its proponents in the 90s during the Clinton administration were Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Both of these men were Republicans and career bureaucrats. Rumsfeld had served as the Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford, as well as the US ambassador to NATO. Cheney had served as the Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush and as a U.S. representative in Congress. Cheney had also served as the chairman and CEO of the Halliburton Company from 1995 to 2000. He was tapped in to be George W. Bush's running mate in the 2000 election because of his experience to even out the relatively inexperienced George W. Bush. Now, Halliburton, for those who don't know, is a part of big oil. It's as dirty, disgusting oil as it gets. In 1990,
Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that Halliburton was involved with that. Pretty shady company.
Oil as it gets. In 1992, as the Secretary of Defense, Cheney had drafted a document laying out the blueprint of how the US government should reshape the world in its image, with suggestions such as increasing the defense budget and aggressively pursuing, quote, shaping the international security order in line with American principles and interests. Cheney and his lot were spearheading the neoconservatives, or the neocons. Neoconservatism is a movement that advocates for an increased American interventional policy. Basically, they believe that the
I'm glad that he's defining it here.
United States should use its power to force others to do what it wants.
But they frame it, neoconservatives would frame it as spreading American values that also happen to be the best values, you know, republicanism, democracy, generally freedoms that we take for granted in the Bill of Rights. They want these kind of forced on the rest of the world. Ideally, though, they would say, oh, no, we don't want to have war to get to this point. We would like to use soft power, not hard power. But sometimes going to war is necessary. They would justify that to a certain extent. Generally, of course, there's different degrees of neoconservatism. There's a spectrum, but that's a way to simplify it.
Through strength, as they say. Bill Clinton, to them, was a soft man who was almost a pacifist, even though Clinton himself.
But I think in some ways, Bill Clinton was a neoconservative, whether he called himself that or not. I think he's heavily influenced by neoconservatism.
Did quite a few nasty things in his tenure, and I'm not even talking about the things that produced DNA evidence all over Monica Lewinsky's dress. And the neocons believe.
And also, I think relevant to Dick Cheney, Bill Clinton, throughout his presidency, continued to drop bombs on Iraq, and the no-fly zone that was implemented. I mean, it was technically an act of war. So it's not like between the Persian Gulf War and the Iraq War, the United States was completely not involved with Iraq. It was up to shenanigans. It was up to shady stuff.
That the United States needed someone who was aggressive and bolder and willing to take the fight wherever American interests needed him to. They found that champion to be George W. Bush, an amateur painter and son of the former president, George H.W. Bush.
I think it's funny that they showed, or that Xiao uses that picture of George W. Bush as a baseball player at Yale. That's I don't even know if I've seen that picture.
Amateur painter and son of the former president,
I love his
George H.W. Bush.
Humor.
Actually, that's not fair. He's a pretty good painter. In their view, the presidency had been weakened by Democrats like Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, and Congress had taken too much power from them.
Jimmy Carter, definitely, of all the post-World War II presidents, he was the least war criminal. You can make the argument that every president since Franklin Roosevelt is technically a war criminal, which means they did things that broke international treaties. They didn't go to Congress to declare war. However they framed it, whether it be Harry Truman saying that getting involved with Korea was a, quote, police action, or the interventions later on that you saw during the Eisenhower administration or the Reagan administration, where even in the executive branch, a lot of people didn't know what was actually happening, that quietly around the world, the CIA and covert operations went down to intervene in other countries to literally overthrow governments. So Jimmy Carter was a pretty dramatic step back from that trend. an exception to the general trend of more and more foreign interventions around the world since World War II. But he still wasn't perfect. There were some things that he did allow the CIA and U.S. military to do. So Bill Clinton, though, he keeps bringing up Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was just as guilty, I think, as most of them. Certainly as Reagan in terms of foreign interventionism.
Was somewhat true because Congress had, in fact, enacted some laws to limit the powers of the presidency in the wake of scandals like Watergate. With Bush taking office, Dick Cheney began serving as the vice president, and Donald Rumsfeld returned as the Secretary of Defense. Towards the end of his presidency, Bill Clinton had signed an international treaty called the Rome Statute, which recognizes the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court. Basically, it meant that if someone was to be brought up on international criminal charges, such as war crimes, the signatories, including the United States, would support the court. However, as soon as Bush took office in January 2001, the neocons, including Cheney, began pressing him to withdraw from the Rome Statute. That behavior is extremely sus, as the kids call it. In addition to that, the neocons believed that the executive branch had a lot more power than the presidents in the past had wielded, and they were trying to figure out a way on how to achieve that. There were ideas like that the Constitution gives the president unitary power over the entirety of the executive branch.
Unitary executive theory. Now, it's important to be aware that Scalia, when he argued for unitary executive theory, which is the idea that the president should be able to control all aspects of the executive branch, simply put, Scalia said the whole point of this is actually to weaken the government, weaken the executive branch, because he would argue that the bureaucracy created by Congress, all these organizations within the executive branch, either under the control of the president or more infamously, the independent agencies, he would argue that this created a fourth branch of government. I don't know if he ever used that phrase, but that's basically essentially what he said. And this caused the executive branch to actually become too powerful in this way. So he would say the whole point of unitary executive theory was to actually limit what the president can do, because then Congress would have to step in for a lot of things. Would that actually play out in reality? That's debatable. But it's important to make that distinction, because a lot of people just assume that Scalia was like, oh yeah, he just wanted the president to be like a dictator, to have all this direct power and influence. That's very misleading. I don't like how people frame it that way. I defend Scalia way too much, by the way. He had bad decisions, okay? Clearly, Citizens United was a big mistake. There were other decisions, but he wasn't always so bad. I used to not like him as much until I actually started reading what he wrote, and I was like, oh, it's actually more reasonable than I thought. Go back and read what Scalia wrote. You might be surprised. He was certainly more principled and consistent than I think a lot of people give him credit for, especially when you compare him to a lot of his contemporaries.
And some went as far as to say that if the president does something, it is by definition legal. On September 10th, 2001, the day before the day that will live in infamy, Rumsfeld delivered a speech at the Pentagon where he directly called the Pentagon bureaucracy, quote, an adversary that poses a threat to the security of the United States. He wanted to, quote, liberate the Pentagon. He'd get his chance just the next day. In an eerie prediction of things to come, the neocons of the Project for a New American Century had asserted a year to the month before 9/11 in their report, Rebuilding America's Defenses, that, quote, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Cheney and Rumsfeld may not have been able to see 9/11 coming, but they proved masters at exploiting the attacks.
That's true.
Now, you have a couple of guys who believe in the United States being the world's police, and its president having basically unlimited powers. At least one of these guys, the most powerful one, I might add, is deeply in the pockets of big oil. You have global imperialism and capitalism.
What's crazy is that George W. Bush partially got elected back in 2000, narrowly got elected. I mean, it was a very controversial election, but he partially got elected trying to basically campaigning on the fact that he didn't think the United States military should be policing the entire world, that perhaps the U.S. military was too involved around the world. That's crazy to think about. You know, after 9/11, what happened with interventions in Afghanistan, the beginning of the war on terror, and of course the Iraq War. With all that, knowing all that later on, and then going back to 2000 when he's like, I don't think we should be nation building. I don't think we should be the world's police. George W. Bush actually said that stuff.
The only thing they're missing is a target, one that can show the world.
So which I guess my point is that, yeah, it was really Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld, Donald Rumsfeld, that were leading the charge. A few others too, but Bush maybe wasn't really in the driver's seat as much as we think, especially during those first couple of years of his presidency.
The United States is now in a full intervention mood, and one that
Thank you.
also has benefits for the capitalist class. They had the perfect target in mind. Throughout the 90s, Saddam Hussein, the military dictator of Iraq, had been the boogeyman for the United States, kind of like Putin is today. He was a dictator after all, and he had a lot of oil. Looks like his people can use some democracy. The Bush government had taken office on January 20th, 2001. And on February 1st, 2001, Rumsfeld had told the National Security Council, quote, what we really want to think about is going after Saddam, unquote. Immediately after the 9/11 attacks, Rumsfeld focused on pushing Bush to go after Iraq. General Hugh Shelton, who was at the time serving as the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and was the most senior military advisor to the president, later told Jeremy Scahill, a journalist and author of Dirty Wars, that Rumsfeld was pushing the...
That's a great book. Scahill is a great journalist. He's done some phenomenal work. I highly recommend him. He's a good follow on social media as well. I'm not sure if he still regularly posts.
...need to attack Iraq, even though, as Shelton puts it, quote, there wasn't one shred, one iota of evidence.
Boo! Oh, wait, somebody doesn't like him. Boo Scahill. What? Oh, okay. Did he? Maybe he fell off. I don't know. I haven't kept up with him in a couple of years. So, that
would say that 9/11 was linked to Iraq, unquote. He then continued, quote, but yet that drumbeat started that night. They didn't like the fact that I came up to the office that night with some plans that we had to respond to 9/11, and that none of them included the Iraq plans, unquote. Bush was in on this hunger for Iraq as well, as he told his counterterrorism czar to look for any shred of evidence that Iraq was involved in the attacks.
I thought this video was about Cheney, though. He's talking about a lot of other people. But yeah, George W. Bush wanted to get revenge against Saddam Hussein ever since he thought that his dad didn't finish the job with the Persian Gulf War.
This happened on September 12th, literally the day after the 9/11 attacks. One of the senior CIA analysts, Dr. Emil Nakle, would later say, quote, my conclusion and that of other analysts was that they were going to war. The train had left the station, regardless of the intelligence we presented. Not only that, but Cheney's office was directly involved in an attempt to coerce information out of prisoners linking Iraq with the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. After 9/11, the United States government pressured the Taliban government of Afghanistan to hand over Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, considered to be the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. Still, the Taliban refused, and the United States invaded Afghanistan in October 2001, toppling the government in November. The people they detained from there were tortured for information. A man named Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi was...
Just to make it very clear, after 9/11, the reason why the United States went to Afghanistan was to try to hunt down Al-Qaeda, the government of Afghanistan, which, yes, at the time was led by the Taliban, and today, once again, is led by the Taliban. they had proven to let members of Al-Qaeda hang out in the country. So once that evidence became clear, which I think it was before 9/11 actually, then it was obvious that the United States government should go in there. And it's also important to make this distinction that the world was on the United States side back then. Almost every country in the world was like, yeah, you need to go after Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden was the mastermind of this. He's the leader of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's been hanging out in Afghanistan. It's okay to go in there and get him, even though, yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation because historically, when you talk about attacks, you think about one country's government attacking another country's government. But this is a new era where you have rogue groups, you have organizations that are not closely aligned with any state in particular. Al-Qaeda had membership from countries all over the world, but many of them were in Afghanistan. So that was a justification for going into Afghanistan, overthrowing the Taliban in order to capture Al-Qaeda. Obviously, it didn't go as we had hoped, and it ended up being the longest war in American history. The war in Afghanistan was the longest war in American history, and it was kind of a disaster in many regards. But yeah, we wanted revenge. That's a good way to put it, Cool Banana. You had so many Americans that just wanted to, we got to get somebody. We got to get them because we're so angry at what happened.
Was detained by Pakistan in November 2001 for terrorism and was handed over to the United States, who interrogated him. Here's what
Pakistan cooperated fully right after 9/11. It's important to point that out as well.
Jeremy Scahill writes about that. The CIA flew Libby to the USS Bataan in the Arabian Sea, which was also housing the so-called American Taliban, George Walker Lind, who had been picked up in Afghanistan and other foreign fighters. From there, Libby was transferred to Egypt, where he was tortured by Egyptian agents. Libby's interrogation focused on a goal that would become a centerpiece of the rendition and torture program, proving an Iraqi connection to 9/11. Once he was in CIA custody, interrogators pummeled Libby with questions attempting to link the attacks and Al-Qaeda to Iraq. Even after the interrogators working Libby over had reported that they had broken him and that he was, quote, compliant, Cheney's office directly intervened and ordered that he continue to be subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques. Quote, after a real macho interrogation, this is enhanced interrogation techniques on steroids, he admitted that Al-Qaeda and Saddam were working together. On WMDs. Former senior FBI interrogator Ali Soufan told.
Couple things here. Yeah, if you torture someone, they'll tell you anything you want to hear. That's why torture, that's one of the many reasons why torture is wrong. Second, C-Spawn, I saw your comment there. Holy crap. We need to also remind ourselves, we need clarity on this. Most of the 9/11 attackers were from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia was another place, another situation where the government knew that members of Al-Qaeda were there. In fact, Osama bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia. They knew that they were up to stuff. There was no good there, and they did not stop this from happening. They probably could have given the United States a lot of intelligence that could have prevented 9/11. So Saudi Arabia, done messed up. Well, we did not invade Saudi Arabia. We invaded Afghanistan. To this day, it is kind of mind-blowing. But yeah, obviously, the reason why Saudi Arabia has been a close ally with the United States for decades. Before 9/11, they were a close ally. They continue to be a close ally, mostly because the United States makes a lot of money based on that close relationship. And also geopolitics has a lot of influence, especially with regards to one of the three countries that Bush termed as evil, the axis of evil. Iran is a big enemy of Saudi Arabia. So our being allies with Saudi Arabia has been beneficial in resistance to Iran. So remember the axis of evil? Got Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. That's why it's also been weird too, like to see, like Trump, I think also hates Iran. I'm not sure why, where that's rooted in. Maybe he has vivid memories of the Iran hostage crisis. Probably that's what it is. A lot of Americans his age still have vivid memories of that and this anger towards Iran. But that kind of explains a lot of his rationale for things too in the Middle East. Okay. Back to this very long quote.
PBS's frontline. But the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, cast serious doubt on Liby's claims at the time, observing in a classified intelligence report that he, quote, lacks serious details, unquote, on alleged Iraqi involvement, asserting that it was, quote, likely this individual is intentionally misleading, unquote, his interrogators, noting that he had been, quote, undergoing debriefs for several weeks, unquote. The DIA analysis concluded Libby may have been, quote, describing scenarios to the debriefers that he knows will retain their interests, unquote. Later, after these claims were proven false, Libby, according to Soufan, admitted he had lied. I gave you what you wanted to hear, he said. I wanted the torture to stop. I gave you anything you wanted to hear.
Okay.
As the United States reeled from the...
That was a long quote there. I kind of got lost in it. But long story short, it's describing torture that took place. And the information gained from the person who was being tortured, I think, influenced Cheney, who then later influenced Bush in terms of like saying, hey, there's this connection here between Saddam Hussein and 9/11, when in fact, there's no connection whatsoever.
Trauma of the September 11th attacks, Congress gave the president unprecedented power to go to war and basically do whatever he needed, including, but not limited to, extra-legal assassinations and spying on and detaining U.S. citizens. Black sites were established throughout the world to do things that weren't very savory and that they didn't want the world to know about. The United States entered into an open-ended war against terrorism, and the president became a security dictator.
So yeah, the specific law we're talking about that gave the president this power, which the president still has this power, which means technically the war on terrorism is still going on, which means the reason why you're seeing boats off the coast of Venezuela being bombed or in the Pacific Ocean being bombed, even though we don't really know exactly who's on these boats. But yeah, dozens of boats now just bombed. Hundreds of people just killed. We don't know, like supposedly they are national security threats, that they're carrying drugs and maybe other illegal stuff. But all of this is justified under the Authorization for Use of Military Force Act of 2001, passed right after September 11th, like a week after. This gave the president a blank check with the war on terrorism to just, you don't need Congress anymore to go to war, because you could just say, oh yeah, no, this is part of the war on terrorism. So what Trump is doing now, I know a lot of people are upset about this, but this is just a part of a much larger trend that goes back to Biden, goes back to Trump's first term, certainly goes back to Obama's full 8 years, and then of course with Bush, who started the drone warfare that escalated under Obama. I mean, all of this is because of the AUMF, one of the worst laws in American history. I made a video about it, but that's what CO-ish is referencing here. So I think it's really important to make it clear that Congress gave the president this authority almost unilaterally. There was only one member of the House of Representatives who voted against this law, and it's still into effect. I mean, it's been weakened in recent years, but it's still technically on the books, and that's why the war on terrorism still technically is happening.
With virtually unlimited power and immunity from being held accountable at home or abroad. Of course, we all know what happened next. The United States invaded Afghanistan to topple its government. Now, in some ways, that war can be justified. Of course, the hundreds of thousands of people who were impacted by the invasion and the thousands dead notwithstanding, the Taliban government was, according to the United States, sheltering the culprit behind the worst terrorist attack on US soil. So there can be some justification for that. And indulge me for a second. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt here. However, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 can never be justified through any measures. And it was simply an invasion of a country that had nothing to do with 9/11.
Correct. 100% correct. Bernie, I'm not sure, but all 98 senators present voted for it. There was only one member of Congress that voted against the AUMF of 2001. Maybe Bernie didn't vote at all. I have to check because 98 of the 100 senators voted. So not all of them, but anyway. So yeah, I'm glad Sia Wimish is being very clear on this part, because we need to constantly remind ourselves that this invasion had nothing to do with 9/11, and there is no good evidence to prove that Saddam Hussein or the Iraqi government had weapons of mass destruction.
Since at least 1992, Cheney and Halliburton had been working on a plan to go after Iraq. After 9/11, they manufactured evidence and consent to attack Iraq. They claimed that Saddam Hussein was linked to Al-Qaeda and that he was manufacturing weapons of mass destruction. The US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, sat in front of the United Nations
cringe.
and held up a vial of anthrax, telling people that Saddam Hussein was weaponizing it to prepare WMDs. The United States then invaded the country of Iraq. I cannot actually show you the footage of the so-called shock and awe attacks on Iraq because of YouTube's policies, but do look them up if you are too young to remember them like me. But look at the destruction under those bombs. There were people there, innocent people like you and me. More than 6,000 people died during the
I mean, the bombs were supposed to be strategic. Most of them were hitting military targets, government targets. However, undoubtedly, civilians got caught up in it. I think most of the damage, though, came later. So not in March of 2003, but in the following months and years after the occupation, that's when you saw more and more civilians die. And then, of course, it's not just directly what the U.S. military did or coalition forces, because it wasn't just the United States, believe it or not. There were a few other countries that helped out, but most of the world said no. You had a few, what was I saying? Okay, yeah, so it's not just the coalition forces that are killing civilians. You have radicals rise up to resist, and then you have other radicals rise up to resist the radicals, and you have this escalation of violence between different factions, and then more civilians get caught up in the death and destruction because of that. So I think it's really important also to think about how anytime you talk about a war, it's usually not just one side versus another side. And also, if you do have one side versus one side, that leads to other conflicts that are, you can kind of think of it like a web, because you have people that are opportunistic that decide to become violent during wartime that otherwise would not. You also have new groups emerge because of reactions to what's happening. So it gets complicated really quickly. And that's why some estimates say that more than 1 million civilians died during the Iraq War. More than 1 million people who had nothing who are not soldiers, many of them women and children. And that's directly because of the United States unjustly invading Iraq. And again, also, if you watch my video about this, it's surprising to kind of think about this. And in March of 2003, it was not as controversial. More than 50% of Americans, I think it was closer to 55% of Americans, approved of invading Iraq and overthrowing the Iraqi government, even though the evidence was shaky, and we now know just straight up made up, linking the connection of 9/11 with Saddam Hussein.
Shock and awe operations. This was a foreign country that didn't have anything to do with the United States at the time. Saddam Hussein had a history of aggression for sure, but this wasn't something that he was involved in. And keep in mind, he was previously supported by the US government during the Reagan era.
Yeah,
Everyone in the Bush government.
I always love showing that picture. That there's actually video footage somewhere online you can see of this, of Rumsfeld. Typo. Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. This was yes, when he was in the Reagan administration, 1983, when Iraq was at war with Iran. So obviously Iran, a big enemy of the United States. We're siding with the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Iraq is our friend. Yeah.
Was previously supported by the US government during the Reagan era. Everyone in the Bush government lied, and almost 200,000 Iraqi civilians died. Not to mention the countless lives that are still being impacted by the destruction of vital infrastructure in the country. I don't even want to talk about the atrocities committed by the US Army on the ground, the torture and humiliation suffered by the prisoners at the Abu Ghraib or the Guantanamo Bay prisons, for example.
Yeah, so those are torture by American soldiers torturing prisoners at these where they're interrogating them for more information about the Iraqi government, trying to find Saddam Hussein.
There are plenty of videos about that on YouTube and quite a few books that paint
I made one.
a very vivid picture on the human rights violations committed by the US Army. Again, I cannot show you any images, but all of that lies on the shoulders of Dick Cheney. This was Cheney's war. According to a 2013 article by...
I think that's accurate to say. Cheney definitely heavily influenced Bush and everyone, Colin Powell. Rumsfeld also was right along with him, though.
CNN.
And so was Paul Wolfowitz.
Halliburton made around $40 billion from the Iraq War. They and their subsidiary, Kellogg Brown and Root, or KBR, received government contracts that were way overpriced, and some of them were even no-bid contracts. These contracts included things like supplies for the soldiers, as well as dousing the fires in the oil wells that Saddam Hussein's soldiers were expected to set as they retreated. Dick Cheney was not directly involved in these contracts, but it's very unlikely that he didn't steer them towards Halliburton. By 2005, after all, Cheney still held around $3 million worth of stock options in Halliburton.
We're on freedom.
Then, of course, there's stuff that Dick Cheney did at home. Dick Cheney was not just any other vice president. He was often called a co-president to George Bush. In that capacity...
Yeah, he definitely strengthened the power of the vice presidency. Probably the most powerful vice president in American history.
He helped build up a surveillance state. The 2001 Patriot Act, which apparently is an acronym, I didn't know that, was passed, and it allowed federal agencies unprecedented power in surveilling US residents and even citizens without proper...
No, the torture was not legal. Yeah, all these presidents could technically be prosecuted. This is bipartisan. Dick Palpatine and Darth Bush. I like it. Yeah, there's a lot he's leaving out here, obviously, but I mean, I'm interested to see how he's tying this Dick Cheney's involvement with the Patriot Act and the surveillance
documentation and authorization. The NCR's program put certain restrictions on people coming from Muslim countries where they had to register with the authorities.
Yeah.
The FBI began surveilling mosques and individuals, even planning people in an attempt to rile up some radicalism. I'm no lawyer, but that sounds like entrapment to me. You're planning a person inside a mosque, hoping that he could help rile up some terrorism in the mosque.
I didn't know about this case.
People were detained from the United States and other countries. These foreigners had no rights in the eyes of the Bush administration. Bush himself said that the Geneva Conventions didn't really apply to them. However, they also detained people from the United States. And all of them were, of course, Muslim. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, in the 11 months after the attacks, 762 aliens were detained in connection with the FBI terrorism investigation for various immigration offenses, including overstaying their visas and entering the country illegally. It is important to note that many of these detainees were arrested indiscriminately and haphazardly. Following are some cases.
Yeah, also the torture. Okay, good comment here. X-Soul's on a roll today. That's true. Also, Guantanamo Bay that's extra jurisdiction we're talking about. So technically, because it's not on American soil, the Constitution doesn't apply. That's why a bunch of shady things happen at Guantanamo Bay, which, by the way, Guantanamo Bay is still open. Obama campaigned to shut it down, and he never did. I'm telling you, the disappointment of Obama is part of the reason why we had the rise of Trump. And a lot of the disappointment of Obama came based on his foreign policy.
Studies presented in the report that show, as the Inspector General said, quote, significant problems in the way the detainees were handled. A Middle Eastern man was arrested on August 30th, 2001, and his release has been delayed for 6 months due to bureaucratic inaptitude. A detainee arrested in New York City was released more than 7 months after his arrest and almost 1 month after the FBI had cleared him. A male detainee was not allowed to make a call to his sister for the first 3 months that he was detained. A woman from New Jersey had only succeeded in visiting her husband 3 times during his more than 5 months of confinement. A detainee participated in a hunger strike to protest his confinement as, quote, excessive punishment. The report also found that the FBI took a long period of time to clear September 11 detainees. The FBI cleared less than 3% of the 762 September 11 detainees within 3 weeks of their arrest. The average length of time from arrest of a September 11 detainee to clearance by the FBI headquarters was 80 days, and the median was 69 days. Further, we found that more than a quarter of the 762 detainees' clearance investigations took longer than 3 months. Keep in mind that none of these 762 individuals were charged with anything related to terrorism. No evidence was ever brought forward. The reason that I'm telling you this is because we're seeing all this again. Donald Trump and his government are doing these things, and that, I think, is one of the biggest parts of Cheney's legacy. He didn't care about rules or laws. He simply wanted the world to look a certain way, and he did whatever he needed to.
And yet, Cheney later would criticize Trump for a lot of these things, even though Cheney himself was fine with that during the Bush administration.
To make it so, he extended the brutality of the American empire, both inside and out. Liberals these days like to talk about how Donald Trump is breaking politics, how he's doing all these unprecedented, crazy things. But is he really? Trump is just taking these things to the extreme. But if you ask...
I think in many ways, Trump has been like a mirror. He's kind of showed us who we really are as a country. And I don't think a lot of Americans wanted to see who we really were. But that's been one of the few silver lining pieces of his presidency is his, in many ways, yeah, sure, he lies all the time, but he lies to himself as well. So he's saying, and sometimes he's saying things that are true that previous politicians would not ever say. and because of that, we now, I think just more Americans in general are cynical of the government, although it was already trending that way long before Trump. But I do think that, a lot of what Trump has done is just a continuation of previous administrations. So that's a good point.
The working class or the minorities, they've seen all this before. Without Muslims being abducted by the Bush government, you wouldn't have Hispanics being abducted by the Trump one. Without Bush and Cheney pushing the powers of the presidency, you wouldn't have Trump aspiring to be a king. People were recently complaining about Trump demolishing the historic East Wing of the White House, but how many historic black neighborhoods were destroyed to build highways? Trump and his family are using the presidency to enrich themselves and their billionaire friends. Well, Cheney did the same.
That.
Cheney actually sent the US military out to war. He didn't sell any bitcoins. He killed hundreds of thousands of people, including thousands of US soldiers, only to have his friends at Halliburton sell them supplies. The lies he and his cohorts told to justify the Iraq war shattered the public's trust in the government. And of course, that shattered trust leads directly to Donald Trump. Not to mention, because of these lies told in the United Nations by the Bush administration, people's trust in the United Nations went down, and the relationship between the Islamic world and the United States got worse forever. In 2018, Christian Bale played the role of Dick Cheney in the movie Vice. When he won the Golden Globe for his role, he thanked Satan for giving him inspiration to play Cheney,
Remember that.
which I think is the most accurate statement ever given on a Hollywood stage. In response, Liz Cheney, Dick's daughter, called Dick a real-life superhero. She's never criticized her father's actions. Both Dick and Liz supported Kamala Harris in 2024 because they didn't like Trump, mainly because of his attempt to steal the 2020 election, even though Bush and Cheney's own election in 2002 wasn't exactly the most clean, if you know what I mean. What's funny here is that Cheney walked so Trump could run. Cheney paved the way for Trump. Trump is basically Cheney, but more brash and loud and dialed up to 11. That is the...
Cheney did it all in the shadows, in secret, because, well, yeah, the Constitution doesn't give the vice president these powers anyway. The Constitution doesn't give the vice president hardly any power, just 2 powers, breaking a tie in the Senate and certifying the electoral votes after a presidential election. That's it. So otherwise, the vice president's not really, supposed to do anything. It makes sense that Vance would just be going on podcasts. It's better than him, secretly plotting a war with a country to profit from it, I guess. So
legacy of Dick Cheney. And for that, if there was even a shred of justice in the world, he would have died in a 2x2 dark cell, serving 23 life sentences. He was a war criminal, and his legacy is just human suffering. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. On the screen right now, you can see the names and tiers.
So yeah, that's the channel. If you want to subscribe, is Al Mukadima. I always have a hard time. Siawish is his name, and he has a really good video about ISIS that I watched a while back. But a lot of good Middle East history videos. Also, he works with useful charts. I think he's Canadian. I'm pretty sure he's Canadian. While we're at it, I just keep thinking about this meme. I'll end things with this meme because I think it's one of the most relevant memes of the past 25 years. All right. I saved it on my hard drive even. Check his hard drives. He's got memes. It's from The Simpsons. You got the Republican convention inside. We want what's worse for everyone. We're just plain evil. Compared to the Democratic convention inside. We hate life and ourselves. We can't govern. I think that about sums it up because we've had lesser of two evils for so long with the Democratic Party, giving us hope, especially with the Obama administration. Progress was made, but not much. Status quo mostly. Biden, actually, we saw more progress, but he couldn't communicate very well. I just think we're overdue for a solid opposition that's for something to the Republican Party. I just think we've been overdue for that for a generation, more than a generation at this point. Maybe 2 generations. Ugh. I go back to the 1980s and I look at like the way that members of Congress talked about things. And even members of the Reagan administration and Reagan himself, the way they talked about things. And I'm just like, wow, you're much more informed and you're much more rational. What happened to this country? And I get why. I know what happened to this country. Things got so bad that a lot of people turned to a demagogue who was different, an outsider. And the Democratic Party has been trying to play catch up ever since the last 10 years. When are they going to figure it out? They're starting to figure it out a little bit, I think, this year, finally. But if they run Kamala Harris for president in 2028, it's for sure over. It is for sure over. Remember that a lot of people that hate Dick Cheney love Donald Trump. That tells you a lot right there. That information tells you a lot. the Nixon JFK. Yeah, that's another way to see how far we've fallen, is just to go back and watch that debate. I mean, in the 1960s, I know there was some chaos that happened, especially in the late 60s. A lot of political violence. I just call it violence, but a lot of violence happened. I think a lot of that, though, was tied directly to a specific event, and that was the Vietnam War. Some of it was also racism in the South with the Civil Rights Movement. But I think overall, if you put those two things aside, the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War, most Americans actually politically were pretty common in the 1960s. That's why Barry Goldwater was seen as this radical person, that it was unbelievable that he got a major party political nomination, and why he got destroyed by LBJ. It was maybe the most lopsided election in American history, I recall, or one of the top three, 1964. So, I mean, yeah, it's just the fact that Americans agreed a lot more in politics in the 1960s, despite the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam War. All right. It's been over an hour. I'm going to call it a wrap. I'm not going to wrap. I'm just going to wrap it up. Call it a wrap. Is that an expression? Is that real? I don't know if that even makes any sense. But thanks for being here. I do this every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Central. If you're new here, if you are new here, thanks for being here. You're welcome anytime. Your fellow students appreciate you being here. AOC 2028. I think a lot of people are. Yeah. I think she's probably the best possibility for the Democrats, to be honest. Wrap it. Can you wrap it up? Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm Beatmaster Matt. Peace all. It's okay. I need to practice this. Okay. Have a good weekend.